The timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's is one of the trickiest parts to nail down about the franchise, especially if you're going after direct years that the games take place. It's somewhat straightforward to place them in the proper order, but figuring out exactly when something happens is difficult if not impossible. But today, I think we might have something that I've yet to see anybody come up with, and that's an exact year that the nightmares of FNAF 4 take place. Or at least begin to take place, as they might be ongoing. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. So the first step to figuring out when FNAF 4 takes place is to decide on what you think FNAF 4 actually is. Because it's not as straightforward as we might hope. It looks like it's a bunch of nightmares that somebody's having, but unfortunately, Tales of the Pizzaplex throws a wrench in it as it always does. One of the stories in it is Didophobia, a story that shows that a boy named Rory was left in an automatic testing chamber for over a decade. Essentially, William Afton had built a fake house, a very bare bones layout of a room with a wraparound hallway, kitchen, and living room. And the entire chamber was pumped with hallucinogenic gas, enough to make this look like a real house and the nightmares more vivid. Rory would wake up, go throughout his day, get ready for school, but then feel a little lost and confused. He would go to the fridge and eat breakfast, and then feel more lost and confused, give up, and go back to bed. That was his every day. When he would go to bed, he would have these recurring nightmares of animatronic characters trying to attack him. Once the gas is gone, we find out that these animatronics are actually mannequins on rails, set to come at Rory at all angles to induce these horrific nightmares. Well, that and the hallucinogenic gas. Not only do we see these experiments plainly in front of us, but Rory manages to get out of this chamber and find that it's connected to the sister location bunker, which on the surface is insane. But when you think about a lot of the oddities associated with FNAF 4 and sister location, it makes more sense. The camera angle we see in the sister location private office showing us the FNAF 4 shots. The fuse map showing us the layout of FNAF 4 and the plush trap minigame on the power system of sister location. Something is up here. And Didophobia seems to be telling us that the thing that's up is that FNAF 4 isn't nightmares, but literal experiments that William Afton is doing on people. So that in mind, is FNAF 4 actually that, or no? After all, we know definitively from Secret of the Mimic these books do not necessarily line up one-to-one with the games. Well, I've been partial to the idea that these games are in fact nightmares, but nightmares based off of the lived experience of going through these experiments. Experiments that William Afton was conducting outside of the sister location bunker. The main reason being that some things don't line up to fit into either category alone. Frankly, mainly it's the FNAF 1 phone call. In the first night of the game, you can hear a distorted version of the Night 1 FNAF 1 phone call playing quietly in the middle of the night. Anything else in this game I could write off as being just a nightmare or just a gas experiment, right? The idea that there are animatronics that look monstrous. Either one could be a hallucination or a dream. The idea that there's hospital stuff. Depending on who's having that dream, that still makes sense. Even the hallucination of the hospital stuff could just be something the person experiencing it is adding on. But the one thing that I cannot explain is that FNAF 1 phone call. The fact that we hear this phone call word for word means that whoever is in the nightmare chamber during the time of FNAF 4 has already experienced FNAF 1, which if so, that would most likely be Michael Afton, which would mean that an adult Michael Afton was taken by William and put into these nightmare bunkers. It seems unlikely, or it's a nightmare, and whoever is having the nightmare would have worked at FNAF 1. So that does make sense, but then why does this nightmare so perfectly line up with the way it's described as an experiment in the books? So because it is so close to these experiments, but has pieces that need to be a dream, my brain just kind of settled on the idea that FNAF 4 is nightmares based on going through these experiments. It's what makes the most sense to me. So if that's what we think FNAF 4 is, now we need to figure out who is the one having these nightmares. Man, this swamp is boring. I almost missed the skeletons in the dungeon. At least that was something to do. Huh, the sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Raycon. Nice. Don't you just love it when one of your favorites comes back better than ever? Like how Kirby Air Ride on the GameCube is one of my favorite games of all time, but like within a month we're getting Kirby Air Riders. Well, guess who else is back and better than ever? Raycon's fan favorite everyday earbuds classic model, now packing active noise cancellation. Raycons have always had the audio quality that's on par with the big audio brands, but at half the price of that competition. And with 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery, you can be listening to them all day, which is great for me because I'm literally listening to either a podcast, a live stream, or some kind of music all day. And with Raycon's protective capsule cases, you can make sure they're even safer while looking amazing. And do not forget that this latest version of Raycon's Everyday Earbuds Classic now features active noise cancellation, the one thing they were missing. Now they're perfect. But sometimes you do want to hear the world around you, which is why Raycons also pack an awareness mode that lets you hear your environment through your earbuds. So when I want to play with my kids but not have to only listen to Bubble Guppies on repeat, awareness mode comes perfectly in handy. So if you're ready to treat yourself to a classic made new, go to buyraycon.com/rytoast to get up to 30% off during Raycon's Black Friday and Cyber Monday sale. Sponsored by Raycon. Now this is how to wander in style. Boring swamp no more. Just what I was looking for, honestly. Let's see if we can find an exit. The way I see it, any potential dreamer for FNAF 4 needs to have 3 criteria be able to be explained. Or if nobody can, then whoever explains the most. Those 3 criteria are the weirdest parts about FNAF 4. The first one, why is this character having these nightmares? Sure, they're nightmares about FNAF animatronics, but they are very specific. And the more we can explain why this character would have these specific nightmares, the better. The second is, why is there hospital imagery in these nightmares? As an Easter egg, if you look off the left side of the bed throughout FNAF 4, you'll see several different images from a hospital. An IV drip bag, some medicine, a bouquet of flowers. Whoever's dreaming this has this hospital trauma associated with them. And finally, and this is the kicker, why does the FNAF 1 phone call play during night 1? You need a good explanation for this. I refuse to believe William Afton just has that recorded and is playing it for the Nightmare Haver. That makes no sense. So with those 3 criteria in mind, who do I think is most likely? Straight away, I think it's Michael Afton. Look, I know the character encyclopedia says that the crying child is the one having the nightmares, and he does answer the nightmares question and the hospital question fairly straightforwardly. After all, he's the crying child, so him having nightmares about the animatronics makes perfect sense, and the hospital imagery is explained by the Bite of 83. If the crying child was put to the hospital after the Bite of 83, which the heart monitor sounds during the final cutscene does imply, then he would have seen these hospital images in his unconscious mind. So having nightmares about what happened would explain that. But again, that FNAF 1 phone call is the thorn in our sides. It does not make sense for the crying child to know the FNAF 1 phone call, unless it was being pumped into the experiments all the way back in 1983, which it shouldn't have been because FNAF 1's restaurant wasn't even open back then. Or, if it is a dream, then the only logical explanation is that FNAF 1 through 4 are just the crying child's nightmares. It's dream theory all over again. This phone call was one of the key pieces of dream theory, because it shows that the dreamer experienced FNAF 1. So if this is all a creation in the crying child's mind, then anything is fair game to show up in FNAF 4. But I don't like dream theory. I think most people don't like dream theory. It's also not really likely anymore. So if there's this big problem with the crying child, my brain then goes to who's next. And the second most likely option for the dreamer of FNAF 4 is Michael Afton, who does have a good answer for all 3 questions. 1. Why is he having these nightmares? Well, it's very possible that William Afton was the one to put Michael Afton in these nightmare experiment chambers. It could have been after the death of the crying child as a way to experiment on him and slightly punish him, or it could even be the fact that the crying child is reaching out to Michael Afton and giving him these nightmares accidentally. After all, like Alone Together says, when a ghost reaches out to you, one of the first signs is that you'll have dreams that are not yours. This could be the crying child's nightmares being given to Michael Afton. Question number 2, why is there hospital imagery? Well, Michael is very likely haunted by the fact that he killed his younger brother. It seems to be this underlying theme that part of the reason Michael is fighting so strongly is to make up for what he's done to the crying child. And if he feels this severe guilt over what he's done and having nightmares related to the crying child, the things he saw in the crying child's hospital room would definitely be showing up as part of that guilty conscience. And finally, the third question, the thorn in our sides, why do they know the FNAF 1 phone call? Well, most people agree that the FNAF 1 night guard is Michael Afton under a fake name. So if these nightmares are happening anytime after FNAF 1, then suddenly that makes perfect sense. Part of his experiences with the animatronics in the modern day are leaking into these nightmares. Alright, so what? Why did I make this whole video? I've personally thought that FNAF 4 was the nightmares of Michael Afton because of his experiences in the nightmare testing chambers after the events of FNAF 1 for a long time. I've been saying this for over a year now. What's new? Well, one of the problems with this theory is that it only gives us a rough estimate for when FNAF 4 takes place. That being after FNAF 1, but before FNAF 6. And depending on your timeline, that's anywhere from a 20 to 40 year gap. So surely there must be some way to get a more accurate placement for FNAF 4 in the FNAF timeline. And that's where I got an email to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza podcast, the weekly podcast I do right here on this channel. It's from Myriad, she, her. And it reads, I'd like to bring up an idea that I've had in my head for a while, but recent evidence had made me even more confident in. FNAF 1 and FNAF 4 take place in the same week. Mike takes the night shift, that's FNAF 1, and then he goes home and sleeps during the day, and that's FNAF 4. It explains Nightmare Fredbear being drawn on the logbook if it's written during FNAF 1, and the phone guy audio in FNAF 4. Since Secret of the Mimic's FNAF 3 map possibly indicates it was a Freddy's location before Fazbear's Fright, this could explain the FNAF 3 office being in the logbook even back during the 80s and 90s. Thoughts? And look, I have some problems with parts of that, especially the Secret of the Mimic mention. But for the major idea, I think that's right. If Michael Afton is having these nightmares, them beginning or being triggered by being in the FNAF 1 gameplay loop makes perfect sense, no matter what you think these nightmares actually are. If you think that Michael Afton is having nightmares based on his personal experience in the nightmare testing chambers, then the idea of going to FNAF 1, a location that's physically very similar to those chambers, being attacked by the same 4 animatronics, would definitely trigger those nightmares, especially if he's repressed those ideas or tried to keep it hidden, and suddenly being thrust into an environment that's so similar, yeah, they would crop up. But if you think these nightmares are being given to him by the crying child trying to reach out to Michael, that also makes sense too. FNAF 1 is the first location that makes the most sense for the crying child to reach out to Michael Afton, especially because we see in the security logbook that it's likely that Michael Afton was in some way trying to reach out to the crying child and to Cassidy. So encountering them both for the first time in FNAF 1 would make sense, and that would lead into the nightmares being given to Michael. But if these nightmares are happening at the same time of FNAF 1, more and more pieces start to line up perfectly. We've already discussed one of the biggest thorns in our sides, the FNAF 1 Night 1 phone call, and that of course lines up, because you hear that phone call in FNAF 1 Night 1, and then you hear it in FNAF 4 Night 1. But that's not all. Night 5 doesn't have a traditional phone call. Instead, it's garbled voices with occasional animatronic screams. And if we roll back to Night 4, that's the night where we get the phone call recording of the phone guy, well, being attacked by all the animatronics and finally being killed by Golden Freddy. We also know that in the week before, in most of the endings where Ralph has the phone, Golden Freddy ends up killing him, especially in the playthrough where we leave those 4 voicemails. So I think it's incredibly likely that that Night 5 phone call is either some disturbance of Golden Freddy being that close to the phone, or maybe even Golden Freddy itself taunting the player on that final night. And if that's true, and Night 5's phone call is Golden Freddy speaking to us through the phone, how interesting is it that that means Night 5 is the first guaranteed time that the player encounters Golden Freddy? Because in FNAF 4 on Night 5, halfway through the night, all of the animatronics are replaced by Nightmare Fredbear, the FNAF 4 version of Golden Freddy. We now have 2 separate instances where something happens in FNAF 1, and that next day when Michael's asleep, his nightmare represents it. This is perfectly setting up the idea that Michael Afton works the night shift at FNAF 1, gets home, goes to bed, and during the day has the nightmares of FNAF 4. Frankly, I even think the movie could be trying to push us in this direction, because what do we see in the FNAF movie but Mike Schmidt working at FNAF 1, going home, going to bed, and having a nightmare repeatedly? Granted, half the time he's having nightmares at the location, but that doesn't happen in FNAF 1, so we can't really use that part. Again, these are not one-to-one. So if this is all true, and I really think it is, not only would that better explain what's going on behind FNAF 4, but that would give us its year. A lot of people have different years they think FNAF 1 takes place, but that's the thing, we have years we think FNAF 1 takes place on. I'm partial to 1993, and if you similarly believe 1993, this theory then posits that FNAF 4 also takes place in 1993, or at least starts. So for one of the first times in this franchise, we might have an exact year that FNAF 4 takes place. So with all that in mind, in my personal timeline, I've got a year for every game up until Ultimate Custom Night, which is kind of huge. Well, except for Sister Location, which is weird as always. But as it stands, I think my working timeline for the year placements of the FNAF gameplay is FNAF 2 in 1987, FNAF 1 in 1993, and at the same time, FNAF 4 in 1993, then at some point, Sister Location, then FNAF 3 in 2015, and finally, FNAF 6 in 2023. Just After the Fire, Ultimate Custom Night, and FNAF World similarly take place in 2023. And that feels really solid. Look, is it guaranteed to be right? No, nothing in this franchise is. But I like this timeline as we look forward. Let me know what you think though in the comments below. Do you agree that FNAF 4 likely takes place simultaneously as FNAF 1? I think that's pretty ironclad. But in the meantime, if you missed it, last week I did a full coverage of Amanda the Adventurer 3, final game in the Amanda the Adventurer series, which you can find right here. If you want your fan art featured on the channel, make sure to share it with #ToastArt. A huge thank you to the best channel members, the Dough Risers, and until next time as always, stay toasty slices.